All right, good evening and welcome to the school committee for February 13th, 2018. Kathy, would you call the roll, please?
Sure. Nick Buchanan?
Here.
David Buckreiser?
Here.
Brian Callahan?
Here.
Sean Reardon?
Here.
Stephen Cole?
Here.
Mayor Holloway?
Here.
Bruce Manning?
I am here.
Yes.
Well, I'm right here, actually.
For the purpose of the record, we are required to announce that Bruce Menon, who is vice chair of the school committee, is participating remotely. And at any point, Bruce, if you have any difficulty with the reception or whatever, please just let us know. Okay?
Good. I'm fine. I would just ask Anthony how I need to speak up.
Okay, great.
Okay, and just let us know. All right, why don't we start with the Pledge of Allegiance, please? Flag over here. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And so Anthony, welcome. Anthony Palomino?
You got it.
Okay, so you have till 7 o'clock in terms of meeting with members of the school committee, and I hope you got all of our names. Do you want us to say them again?
That would be great.
Okay. Donna Holiday, Mayor, Chair of the school committee.
Stephen Cole, member.
Sean Reardon, member.
Brian Callahan.
David Buckreiser.
Nick Decanter.
My guy.
So you have a clock up here behind you so that you can sort of keep track of the time yourself in terms of answering questions. And if you're all set, we'd like to begin.
Excellent.
Okay, the first question, we're going to rotate questions amongst the committee members. The first question, now that you've met members of our schools and community, some of them, and have had the opportunity to tour the school district, what word or phrase would you use to describe our school district and why?
Okay. I'm going to choose something I said very early on in the morning at the first school that we visited, Bresnahan. We're talking about the facility, we're talking about the programming, and what was said to me, it's about the people. It's the people here. That's really what I said.
Steve?
Sure. Hi, Anthony. Please describe a challenge you have recently met and the strategies used to sustain that accomplishment, and why is sustaining an accomplishment important to a school district's future?
Challenges come in lots of different ways, and I'll go back before my consulting as a principal to talk about that as a challenge. One of my challenges that came about, and I described this in some of the interviews that I had today, was that we had decided at the Fisk Elementary School in Wellesley, we had moved from a level 1 to a level 2 school the year I arrived. And so we talked with the staff about what are we going to do different to improve our level of instruction. And so in doing so during the summer, we talked about different strategies, and one of them that came up was growth mindset. We talked about growth mindset. And we decided to study growth mindset to see if that was something that we were going to try as an instructional strategy. And I let the staff read about it. We did activities around it. We talked about it. This is during summer meetings, PLC meetings, staff meeting days. And we agreed that growth mindset would be something that we wanted to try as a group, as a school. And we focused solely on growth-minded feedback. And that's what we talked about primarily. And so I told the staff, now that they all understood it and we talked about it, do we agree on it? And they said, yes, we agree. I said, great. I'll go out and listen to hear the feedback. And growth-minded feedback is more about process than product, and it's more about effort kids put into their work. And so when I decided to do that, I went through 3 days of walkthroughs, 2 to 4 minutes per classroom listening to feedback. And the gold standard we decided was process, effort, feedback. Well, in those 3 days, I heard one teacher one time do it. One teacher one time do it. And I told the staff I was going to share the data with them. And before I put the data up, I said, no judgments, let's just talk about what we see. And we had all kinds of praise. We had cause and effect praise, which is good praise. Because you studied for the last 2 weeks and stayed after school, you did well on your test. That's cause and effect. We had I like and I love. Teachers say that a lot, especially at elementary school. I like the way you did that. I love the way you did that. And good job, great job. And then there was no praise. So when I put the data up and they saw one teacher one time, they were disappointed. I was disappointed. But it was really my fault. I said to them, this is my fault, not yours. Let's talk about the data, but let's talk about, and then we'll talk about what I did wrong. So when we talked about the data, the staff said, I said, okay, tell me about the data. Well, we only said one growth-minded praise and 3 days of visits. You know, we had a lot of great cause and effect praise, yes. And so in the discussion, I said, okay, let's talk about what happened. He said, well, when I went to say good job, I didn't have anything to replace my language. I would say good. So I didn't have anything to say to change my feedback. So I said, we can work on that. So we worked on writing our own feedback that was more process, more effort-based feedback. And then we talked about, some teachers said, well, I have kids who go right through the work, Anthony, and I can't give them effort feedback because it would be disingenuous. I have to make the work more challenging. So we talked about how do we make the work more challenging. How to separate groups out so the challenge is available for every student. And then I said to them, I'm going to give you time to practice. So I didn't give them a week to practice, a month to practice. I gave them 3 months to practice the feedback that we were hoping to give students to motivate them to learn more. And so over that course of 3 weeks, we had more PLC meetings, more staff meetings. We practiced together. We shared what we had learned. And then I went back out again. I said, I'll report back. And so the second time I went out, 22 instances of teachers giving growth-minded praise. And so we accomplished more praise through the challenge. We used the challenge as a learning experience. I used the challenge as a learning experience. It wasn't a failure. It was something we didn't do well because I had made a misstep. And anytime I think of new changes, I think about Costner's complex change model, which says you need a vision, you need skills, incentives, resources, and an action plan if you're to get real change. Vision tells you why you're doing it. Skills are what you learn while you're doing it. Incentives are what do the kids get out of it, what do I get out of it. The resources, the people, the software, the books, whatever that you can use in each other. And the action plan is how is it going to go forward. So the mistake I made was I assumed they had the skill. And in Costner's model, if you don't have the skills, you feel anxious. So that first time I went around, the staff felt anxious because they couldn't do what I thought they would be able to do, but they hadn't learned it yet. So I gave them time to practice so they were able to do it. And we saw excellent results through that challenge.
Thank you. David?
Sure. How can Newburyport's personnel evaluation and professional development strategies dovetail so that teachers can be provided with meaningful feedback on their efforts to operationalize our strategic plan and Clipper values? That's a mouthful, so you.
Yeah.
So, we're essentially talking about the evaluation tool and the professional development work, helping teachers operationalize the strategic plan and the Clipper values.
Yes.
And support those teachers as they're continuing to grow as educators.
So it's a good question. Part of the question is and I've asked that question today, how are the values arriving? How is the strategic plan working in schools? So part of that is finding out what's working now, and then how do we support it? But anytime I've done any professional development in this manner, there's always been an accountability piece, and let me give you an example. So when I first arrived at the MacArthur School in Waltham, I asked the staff, what do you need professional development on? They said, writer's workshop. We were given 4 slides at the beginning of the school meeting, and we have no idea how to do it, yet we're being held accountable to it. So we brought in a noted expert, Mary Ellen Jacoby, to work with our staff. I gave each staff member 9 hours of in-house professional development coverage for them. So every staff, special education, ELL, general ed, everybody got the training. And when we finished with the training, we said, okay, what did we learn? And we had a list of what we learned. And I said, this is what I'm holding us accountable to. What you provide, what we've learned. And so during my walkthroughs and during my evaluations, observations, I held people to those accountable elements that we learned and talked about. I see a similar strategy here. Because part of what happens poorly with professional development is it's brought in, it's done over maybe one time, one and done, or it's done maybe a couple times, and then it disappears, and maybe a consultant comes back the following year, and there's no practice time. So just like I mentioned with my own staff, there has to be abilities to practice and be coached in what we're trying to have the teachers learn. That can also be done through the evaluative process and holding us accountable to what we've learned and how we're going to do it better.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. Describe a situation where you faced serious differences between stakeholders about the application of limited resources on a project that was important to your job. What were those differences that you saw amongst the stakeholders, and how did you overcome them?
Okay. Can you just repeat the first part again?
Sure. Describe a situation where you faced serious differences between stakeholders about the application of limited resources in a project important to your job.
You know, in certain places where I've been principal, the resources haven't, there hasn't been a lot. And so when I entered in Gloucester School, Veterans School, again, I asked the staff what they would like for professional development. And they said, we would like greater classroom management, professional development, how we manage our class, and how you manage the school, both with incentives and rules and procedures and consequences for the whole school. The school had been leaderless for quite a while. And so they felt that there was no systems or protocols in place. In Gloucester, there was very little money, very little resource to do this, besides myself and what I had done using a book study and using a book that I could purchase through the school department. So it was a matter of finding the resource that was not expensive, and the work was actually in the doing of providing professional development to the staff over a length of time, which we scheduled. We had 2 staff meetings per month. We didn't have much other time outside of that, so we dedicated 1 per month to going through the book study and how we were going to create procedures and protocols around management of school and management of classrooms. The resources were limited right off the bat, so it wasn't that there was a friction with them. It was a matter of determining what resource to use and how to use it. And part of that was using part of my expertise in doing that in prior school, and actually do it myself as a classroom teacher. But then we also looked in other schools. We tapped our own resources with staff and their own expertise. And that's one way to move around limited resources. Did I not answer the question?
No, I guess I would like to hear a little bit more about the differences between the different groups of stakeholders that you encountered and how you mediated that. I think I heard the process of how you reached out to a particular group, but I didn't necessarily hear the conflict of 2 different groups of stakeholders. You may not have seen that in this case.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of one. I can't think of a friction one that made a friction or difference.
Thank you.
Thanks, sir. Brian?
Hello. Technology question. What is your vision of and experience with implementing and integrating technology and learning experience across all grades, pre-K through 12? What are the potential challenges to and potential pitfalls of comprehensive technology across all grades?
So right off the bat,
split it again if you want to.
no, I think I have it. But I don't have experience across the K-12 model. So I can speak to the experience in the K-5 model and how that might apply. So after we did the writer's workshop, professional development at the MacArthur School, then we had all this great writing from students. And part of writer's workshop is the ability to publish. And so we didn't have an avenue for that. So in doing that professional development, we brought in Peter Reynolds, who's a noted local author. He worked with our entire school, but also with especially with our English language learners and our sheltered English learning classrooms. But his company also engaged in his company to use Web 2.0 tools to publish student work. So using things like SlideShare, Prezi, all these things that we could then take the student work and publish it online. So then it's a publishable work. And students are far more motivated to publish their work in that manner. Now, around the challenges and the pitfalls, the challenges were that our staff did not have that training, so we brought that training in. I would never say to staff, here's a couple of tools to use, go for it. You know, some people will attune themselves to that kind of challenge, but not everybody. So we brought in some expertise around using Web 2.0 tools. Again, we brought that, we embedded it into the school day, and embedded it into the work that the kids were already doing. You know, you have to be careful with safety in the internet and how you publish names, and do you publish names with the last initial or with the grade level? And we had to make some decisions and share that with the community of how we were going to publish. And if parents and families did not want student work published for whatever reason, because it was going to go on the web. You know, other kind of challenges and pitfalls are, technology is a tool. A chalkboard at one time was a tool. It's how you use the tool. It doesn't take over for instruction. It actually, in some cases, makes it more challenging for the teacher to use the technology. So there's got to be professional development and business staff when we bring technology on. Another challenge is what happens when the technology becomes outdated. What is the technology plan to update as we go through the system? And then how do you want to use the technology? Do you want to use it, as I saw earlier today, touring here, at making a movie trailer? Do you want to use the technology for more personalization for students? Do you want to use the technology for kids who have disabilities to have them access and engage the curriculum? So it's about usage. It's about how do we get the technology in the hands of the teachers so the students can use it? And how do we update it as we go along?
Thank you.
Welcome.
Sean?
Okay. How do you communicate and make yourself visible in the school system and the community that you're working in? How do you use that visibility to build a positive and collaborative culture across the district through K-12? How do you gain support for schools in the community you work, and how big a role do you think communication plays?
Communication is huge. Because as you were saying at the beginning of that question, presence. And being present, part of being present is communicating. That I'm here, that I'm available, that I'm open. In my schools that I've led, I've always been present in the building. I always promised that I would know all the kids' names before Thanksgiving break in the schools where I led, and I always learned them because I was present. I was at recess, I was in the lunchroom, I was in the classrooms, pick up, drop off, wherever the kids were, I was there as well, learning them and who they were. So I think it'd be present, not think, I know I would. And that's one of the attractive things to me about Newburyport, is that in this size of a district, there is the availability to be present in all buildings. And being housed in 2 of the schools, you're actually right there. Part of the challenge is making sure you follow through on that. So I said this in teachers today. I will be present. I will learn all staff names, not by Thanksgiving, but by the end of the year. Give me a little bit more leeway, a little bit more spread out, right? So, and I'm a little bit older. So I will make good on that promise. Because if I don't, then I'm going to lose the trust of some of the staff, and the trust is very important to me. You know, reaching out to the whole community is important. When I was in Woburn, we had some kids that were at risk of not doing well on the MCAS test. So I got together with some teachers to create some after-school tutoring. But we connected with Raytheon, who had just moved into Woburn at the time. And I pitched to Raytheon, I would like to have you come and teach my students after school and help them learn math. I'll train you, we'll provide the materials, and I will come to Raytheon and train any volunteers that want to tutor. So I did that for 2 days. I also brought the tutors and folks from Raytheon out to my school to tour it and talk about the students we had and what the population was like. And we made a strong connection. We had tutors that came out and taught kids. We created hands-on lessons. And by the way, we asked Raytheon for $3,000 to buy the supplies, and they said yes. And And so in doing so, in communicating what the need was, and communicating how they could help, they saw value in helping us. And they reported back after the program that they got just as much out of it as the students did. And the students not only got hands-on instruction that helped them, that taught them differently, they had a role model that was in the community that used math in their everyday career, in their lives. As far as communicating, beyond just the presence, I always sent daily emails to my staff. I always sent a long email, I call it a TGIF email on Friday, something I noticed, something that was inspiring, something I wanted to share with them. I was telling people today in different interviews, I have people that still have those emails 10, 12 years later, they save them because it meant something to them. And then I also communicate with parents weekly through a newsletter. Started by print, and then as technology increased, did it online. I see that opportunity here. And that came up in several discussions. Better and clearer communication throughout the district. When you communicate well, whether you're talking about a curriculum initiative, you're talking about the budget or success you want to celebrate, and people are used to getting the communication, then they look for it. And then more people understand what we're doing, why we're doing it, and how it's going well, or even what the challenges may be.
Great, thank you. You're welcome.
Anthony, here are some facts. The school budget comprises approximately 50% of our city budget. We receive only about $2 million in Chapter 70 state allocation to fund, excuse me, a $28 million operational budget. Our community has supported significant capital projects, but has not approved operational overrides. They have approved debt exclusion votes for major capital projects, but not for operational overrides. What would be your process for developing an annual school budget? And could you share your thoughts and ideas about generating new revenue streams?
Sure. Developing the budget would be something that we would begin early on. The schedule that would be clearly communicated through leadership, department heads, building principals, central office staff, working with the mayor, school committee, and communicating what the goals, what the values we were trying to support in that budget. I've said this quite often today. I really feel that what you spend your money on is what you value. So for instance, adding your Spanish teacher back, or adding a guidance director, those things were important to Newburyport, and those were included in the budget as salary position because that's what you felt the money needed to be spent on. So when you clearly communicate what the values are in the budget and how you're spending the money as you go through the process, there's no surprises for any of the stakeholders in what we're doing and why. A lot of the budget is people. It's salaries and benefits, steps and lanes, in doing things within the confines of that budget and finding money to do what we value is important. Finding different funding sources. I was doing this, researching this all week, like what are different grant sources if we're following the strategic plan, for instance, and we feel by you following that strategic plan that more personalized education is important to us. It is mentioned in that document in places. It's not cohesive though. So in finding out about that strategic plan, for instance, if that's something we want to go forward with and communicate well with, there are grant funders that do that. And so it's a matter of finding grants, applying for grants. I always was looking for funding for projects, but also thinking about how could I do them in cost-efficient ways. Like I said, a book study is not an expensive way to go about it. Tapping the expertise, that came up a few times today. What about the expertise within the district? There's always expertise that we overlook that could possibly provide professional development for our staff here. So as far as going through the budget, setting the values that we're going to support in that budget, setting the timeline, who we're meeting with when, and presenting the budget in a timely fashion so it can be discussed in this committee and it can be presented to the school in a timely fashion, and not have it be filled with any surprises or last minute additions or anything like that. So for me it's about values and planning and getting the most for our money, and working within the confines and restrictions that we have. As a superintendent, you want what's best for the students always, but you don't have unlimited resources. said, people have supported the schools. And you want to honor that as well.
Thank you. We're back to Steve now.
Nothing from Bruce. Okay, a leadership system is described as how decisions are made. What is your leadership system, and how would you replicate it at all levels in the school district? If you would not replicate it at all levels, why not?
So leadership and how decisions are made. Through leadership. I've had discussions about this during the day. There are different methodologies for leadership. There's one as the leader, as the principal, as the superintendent. There is the buck stops with that person. We're responsible, for a school, or responsible for a school district. There are only limited times we have to make decisions based upon that. I moved mostly from a shared leadership model, so I wanted to encompass my staff within my leadership, and we made decisions around growth mindset through that leadership model in Wellesley, the Writers' Workshop and publishing through that model in Waltham. So there's got to be elements of shared leadership. When people feel they have an active and involved voice in the decisions that are being made, they're far more motivated and willing to offer their opinion. Part of that, going back to that communication within leadership, part of what we have to do, and I had this discussion with building leaders, is we have to be comfortable putting up problems of practice in front of ourselves and discussing them. But we definitely need protocols to follow, so we're not making judgments about each other. So there's a safety element to that, but there's also, how do we get there? And I feel often, most often, together we are better. So in crafting, problems of practice, there also will be, systems that we can put in place depending on what the decision is, and hearing from stakeholders in that manner. So shared leadership is important. Also understanding when it's an opportunity where you need to make the decision as the leader. So even when it's reported to you in a shared format, you can say, I've heard everybody, but this is going to be a difficult decision. I think this is the way it needs to go. And this is the decision I'm making and why. So even within that context, there's flexibility around making decisions. I always said to my staffs and even parents when I was meeting during IEP meetings, when making decisions, you try to make the best decision you have with the information that is available at that time. And if you don't have to make a decision in that moment, you can buy time and find more information before making a decision.
And would you try to do that at every level so you had, if you will, consistency in the leadership system?
I think there's opportunity for it here, yes, I do. And even speaking with the staff today, to have a voice at the table and be heard and be validated is important. Even if we don't arrive at the same decision. I came up earlier today, how do you feel about conflict? I said, I wish that question was asked of me when I became a principal. And as a superintendent, I'll ask that question of people who want to be principals. Tell me how you deal with conflict. Because there's decisions in that all the time as a principal. And being able to make those decisions and make the best ones possible. Thank you.
All right, we're going to talk about curriculum.
Let's do it.
Great. How are you going to inspire faculty to use a variety of data when crafting and refining a student's day-to-day classroom experiences, so that students have the needed opportunities to prepare for their futures and demonstrate at least proficiency within all of the Massachusetts curriculum frameworks?
So when we talk about data,
right, a variety of data, obviously.
Formative, summative, right?
However,
informal, formal.
If you want to include like your vision of what a variety of data looks like, that would be a great piece to that.
Yeah, and so often in public education, it's the summative data at the end that we rely on for lots of decision making. Where that is certainly viable and important data, but it's still a snapshot in time. working through the lens of a growth mindset, where we're actively engaging with students and adults in how they are learning, what the process is, and what they're learning in that process. So when I said praising process, praising effort, the process, what are you doing to learn, and how are you doing it? And what effort are you putting into the learning? That is more available in formative assessment versus summative. So formative being even something as an informal running record that a teacher does once a week with a student. So it's data that teacher is gleaning and making decisions on how they're teaching, what they're teaching. And teachers do a lot of this naturally. I did it naturally and didn't know what it was called at the time, and so you practice that. And certainly to learn, what are the teachers using now? What's available now to them? In districts where I've worked, in the last, let's say the last 5 years, maybe 8 years, I know some staff feel overwhelmed with assessment. We're assessing. I get the complaint, we're not teaching enough, we're assessing too much. So what's the balance? I would also say there has to be a good balance of assessment and then using that data. How do we use that data to drive instruction? And so we can use that in a number of ways, whether it's in a PLC, whether we talk about it as a district or a school. I feel like the data drive is going off the side of a little bit. It's important, but I think people can get lost in the data, or they get overwhelmed by the data, or they get disappointed by the data. So the use of the data is important from that assessment piece. How is that going to change instructions? So a teacher in 5th grade class, after every math test, they would give the kids a questionnaire. What mistakes did you make? Why did you make them? What did you misunderstand the directions? So math test, misunderstand the directions. Did you make a calculation mistake? Did you not understand the concept? So they get to circle it. And so I had a teacher say to me one time, Anthony, I had 75% of my students circle, didn't understand the concept. So it's data. And I said to Kelly, her name is Kelly. I said, Kelly, you know what to do. Yeah, I have to reteach that. Here's the pressure though. Well, then the other 2 5th grades are going to be ahead of me. Right? Because this is Wellesley, driven district. And she had to worry about that. And I had to say, no, I give you permission to go back and give the students what they need. If you have any criticism, you can send it to me. So even using the data, we have to be mindful of what that means. If we have to go back and teach, even in that example, there was anxiety about, I know what I need to do, but I'm worried about doing it because of what I might hear from the parents.
Can I follow up?
Go ahead. Oh, I'm sorry.
So you just mentioned 3 teachers, one of them who's recognizing an issue in the classroom, the other 2 seemingly have no issues. So the question speaks to inspiring teachers to look at data. As a school administrator myself, I'm doubting that the other 2 teachers that Kelly's worried about don't have their own issues. But it doesn't sound like they're looking at their own data. So how do you get people to do that, to open up that can of worms and say, wait a second, maybe I need to change instead of, my kids need to work harder kind of mentality.
Well, it's an interesting point, the way you bring up, maybe it was in their data too, they just didn't reveal it to me.
Or they didn't ask for it in the first place.
Yeah, it was, they did it as a grade level, they did it for every test.
Oh, okay.
But to answer your question, there has to be time built in for them to look at their data, and also you provide the professional development, how to dive in, how to dig. So, for instance, when I made that mention about the data on feedback, I had done some training with RBT, okay, around data coaching. And there were some very good examples of what to do with data. 1, make it big so everybody sees it. Okay, that's 1. 2 is, when you see the data, no judgments, just facts. So let's separate yourself from judgment, okay? And then once you get the facts down, what are the interpretations of the data that we can take away from this? And then what do we do next? What do we need to change, do better, or follow, or hold ourselves accountable to? So there's formulas for working with data that I think have to be explained, or maybe they're happening here, and I have to find out about them and duplicate those.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Good follow.
Okay. moving over to planning for a bit. When you take over the superintendency, if you are a selected candidate, there will be 2 years of implementation on our current strategic plan. How will you support it? What excites you about the plan? What processes will you use to build our next strategic plan?
So part of my fact finding in my first year is finding out where is it, how is it being implemented? What's happening right now? I go to lots of schools. I said today several times, I did over 200,000 miles to 23 states and 2 foreign countries. I see lots of great mission statements. Now, strategic plan is a little bit more than that. But when I go to those schools, I say, okay, show me where it's living. Where's your mission statement? Can you point to it? So I think that's part of what my fact finding would be there, is how is it a living document within the schools? What's working and why? Where do we need to support it more? What excites me about it is A, that you have it. Okay? I said this several times in my interviews today. It's a blueprint. It has a lot of my belief systems are in there on social emotional learning, competency-based, the opportunities for flexibility and personalization, reimagining teaching. Imagine having a license for that. That excites me. And if this is a strategic plan that is passed, accepted, and working, we're going to see that evidence somewhere in these schools. Maybe we'll see it everywhere in these schools. And maybe it's just an enhancement. Or maybe it's a decision about how do we go forward in professional development to support this element of it. Because to support it all at once, I feel is a heavy lift. A lot at once. And so my decision making with the leadership and hearing from the staff and students is where is it? How is it working? How can we enhance it? What kind of professional development do we need to live it? And how do we live it every day?
So the follow-on to that would be, so when the time comes, how would you go about planning the process for developing a new strategic plan?
We would work off of the successes of our current strategic plan. Maybe it would be a narrowing focus. Maybe it would be a different focus. It would depend on the work that we had done and completed. In year 2, I see at least 2 to 3 years of work on that strategic plan. Because it takes time to change. And you have to give staff and students and community time to do that. I was talking to the mayor earlier, talking about working within a school system and helping change. You can't, it's like almost like turning an oil rigger. You can't just turn the wheel and expect everyone to go with you. If you turn it too fast, you roll the oil tanker. So it's a matter of where are we? What are we doing? How do we do it better? How do we support it better? Are we living this document out to its full end yet? Finding that out. It definitely excites me, and the values excite me as well, because it gives you a foundation in everything that you do. Ryan?
It's about accountability. What have you done in your previous jobs to increase and ensure a high degree of accountability at the faculty, school, district, and greater community level? How do you balance innovation and accountability?
You know, I mentioned this earlier, when you provide professional development, when I provided professional development with my leadership team, there was always a level of accountability. And sometimes that accountability changed over time. So with growth mindset, we started working with our feedback. Then we moved to assessment, framing, and grading, and how do we manage retakes. And then we worked with the kids about what's the understanding of growth mindset, and working with each classroom and using our local grant funding to create a program for each lesson of growth mindset where we do. We had core values that we had, so we did one lesson on core values a month, and then the next month we do a growth mindset, something about growth mindset. So that accountability moved over time, and the target moved over time. Same thing with anti-bullying. We started out with doing an anti-bullying initiative the year before I arrived at the 5th school. That began to change and evolve over time to really connect to our core values of who we were as a school, how we lived those values, what happened when those values were broken, and how do we celebrate those values? And so that was a level of induction, instruction, learning, and then we made tweaks to that each year. Like we just didn't abandon it because we did it 1 year, 1 time. So as we did growth mindset, as we did writers workshop and moved into publishing, we changed the target and the accountability, but the innovation was laid into the plan because I always am thinking 3 to 5 years when we make a change. What are we doing in year 1? What are we doing in year 2? What are we doing in year 3? So at FISC, it was year 1 work with the staff, year 2 work with the students, year 3 work with the community and the families. We did have interwoven opportunities within that, but that was the focus. And so when you allow schools to innovate, when you allow them to do some of the learning and take some of that responsibility for themselves, they run with that. So in growth mindset, teachers would come back to me in year 2 and say, Anthony, our report card comments, they're not very growth minded. We need to change those. So they're innovating. I held them accountable to it, and they're starting to innovate on their own. And you have to support that. That's when you know you have this kind of mass collaboration or critical mass of people working towards the same goal and same end. Then you really have change, positive change.
Thanks.
Thank you.
How you doing?
I'm doing all right. Coming into the home stretch, I believe.
All right, I'm going to talk about special education. So special education costs are such a significant portion of our school budget. What experiences do you have working with special education, and have you any experience finding creative ways to provide and fund proper services for all children with a limited budget?
Yeah, that's been seems to have been a challenge everywhere I've been. Students have the right to their education. They have a disability, we have the duty to teach them depending on the disability so they learn at the level of their peers. And that cost is different from general education costs. So we're bound by that duty to do that. We're bound by the law to provide those services for those students. And on some level, it troubles me that the cost comes up as a discussion because I have a daughter who's a special education student. So if her services are driving costs or they're high, my response is, well, that's the duty of the district to provide those services. To answer the second part of your question in being creative, so in the school in Waltham, MacArthur School, we had substantially separate classrooms at each grade level, meaning there was a general education classroom. Those students were involved in that classroom part of the time, mostly just homework count, lunch recess, specialist activity. And then they had their reading, their math, and their literacy, writing within that substantially separate classroom. When I got there, the definition of substantially separate classroom, it felt like it was substantially separate. The kids did not feel part of their classrooms. Therefore, they did not feel part of the school. And many of them were coming from out of district. So one of the things I initiated when I got there was a co-teaching model. There were 2 teachers that were interested in it. I sent them the professional development around co-teaching with the edict that when you finish, you're coming back and sharing with us what you're doing and why, and how we can do it better as a school. And that included things as simply as making sure students did morning work together instead of letting them go. That meant when we had IEP meetings and children were making progress in math or reading or writing, and we felt they could make gains in the general education classroom, how we put them back in the general education classroom with support. So we didn't sink or swim. So there's a support mechanism in place, and that took pulling staff from different areas to do that. And that was a challenge of staff. But that was working within my means, but that was not happening before I arrived. Special education students can learn on the level with their peers. And when they do, we should give them the opportunity to be included with their peers. So that inclusion model, when I went into that 5th grade classroom, and both the special education students and the general education students and teachers were together, and if I had brought you with me, you wouldn't be able to point to who was who. It was that seamless. And then those students felt that they belonged in this community. Thus, they were more motivated to learn. So that's a no-cost or low-cost solution. There are other things around programming that obviously special education has to look at and how we can do it better. And that dovetails into technology, into professional development of staff. The ideas that they give us around programming, how we can do it better and more efficiently. But certainly how we approach special education and make sure that students get what they need is important to me. And then how do we do it so they feel included and they belong? Because my daughter even identified at first grade that she was different. I'm different. I'm not as smart as my classmates. Or I'm dumb. Because it takes me longer to do it. And that's heartbreaking to hear as a parent. Did I answer that?
Yeah, thank you.
Anthony, this is on partnerships. We have worked over the past several years to increase partnerships with local institutions of higher learning, and now have the largest number of student teachers to date. Please share your thoughts on developing and expanding higher ed partnerships for the district and in providing more educational options for students.
I think it's great that you already have the partnerships in place. We talked about that as President Hand today, about how many student teachers and how many fellows, and how do we increase that? You know, a school I interviewed at a long time ago was the Mission Hill School in Boston, started by Deborah Meyer, who started a small school movement years ago. And part of their operation was every teacher had a student teacher within that school. K, every teacher had a student teacher or a fellow. And they devised a system of how they were going to co-teach with the students. But also there was a system in place where there was an efficiency because they never needed a substitute. They used them, so I think they were mostly fellows, not just student teachers. They were there for a whole year commitment. So when you bring teachers into a district, student teachers and fellows, what you're doing is you're bringing the latest research into the schools and the classrooms because they're learning it. They'll learn something that I didn't learn when I went 20 years ago. But you're also giving those student teachers the experience of an veteran, experienced teacher of the way to teach. So it's a very symbiotic relationship. So my question would be, how do we increase it? How do we make it more available to all schools? And how do we innovate on that? And how do we engage with the school leaders in Salem State, Merrimack, and Endicott, I believe? I would engage with those leaders on how it's gone for them up to this point, and here's some opportunities we see for growth, and to see if we can partner together to do so. I'm happy that the door's already been opened though.
Okay. At this point, we've run through our list of questions and would like to give you an opportunity just to ask us questions, to share some of your thoughts about the process so far. Anything else you'd like to share with the committee at this point?
Okay, great. First, let me share with the committee, which I shared with some people earlier today in different groups that I interviewed with. Starting out as a newspaper reporter and working in that field and enjoying it, but not feeling I made an impact. Coming to teach is the way I felt I could make an impact with students, with the world in general. When I had my students in 5th grade, I would say to them, I might have the doctor that cures cancer in this class, or I might have the pilot that flies my plane, or the nurse that's going to take care of me when I'm sick. And I meant that. And when I was able to reach out and find some of my first students from 20 years ago who are now, in their late 20s, the age when I taught them, and find those students, and I found 5 or 6 of them, from Boston, and one was managing a dental office, which was great. She was happy in her position. One student became soloist in the Boston Ballet, and he sent me tickets to watch him dance. One student wanted to become a professional athlete for the football, but he made it to the practice squad of the Minnesota Vikings. He also graduated from Stanford. He was a med student at Ohio State. One of my students at Boston College Law School, I'm like, these are my students. If I was able to make this much of an impact in their lives to get to that point, that's important and rewarding to me. And so that's why I taught. And that's why I chose to lead, and that's why I believe I can lead in the school district, because of that passion that I have for education, not only for the students, but for the staff who teach those students, for the leaders who lead those staffs, and for the greater community. So having the opportunity to consult and see lots of different ways of doing public education across the country, I realized what I was missing. And that was building those relationships day in and day out with people who had the same commitment I had, the same dedication I had. And I see that before here. When I asked the high school students today, can you name a teacher who inspired you? I had like 6 or 7 right over there, and they all rolled off 3, 4, 5 names like that. That tells you something about the system and the education that you provide here for these students. And so that level of, engagement, inspiration that they're receiving tells me something that this is a very good school system. And certainly there'll always be challenges, but what I've learned as both a teacher, leader, and consultant, I feel I can bring a skill set to this leadership team, and they want it, because I asked them today, what do you want? Someone said we need to connect the dots better. We need to be more cohesive together as a team. We need to have professional development and learning together. We need modeling. We need better communication. So these are some ideas that came forth today that I know I can supply as a leader, because I've done it in the past. It will be a little different. There's certainly things I will need to learn, but I'm excited to do so. And I'm excited about the school system and the potential to lead it. And so, as I was going through all the interviews today, partway through I said to myself, I wish other people had this opportunity. Because I really got an opportunity to see and hear a lot about your school system and things that are going really, really well, and the opportunities that present themselves. To me, anytime I see a challenge, to me it's an opportunity. It truly is an opportunity. So I want to let you know that about my feeling about coming back to leadership. I'm wondering if there's been a question that's been left unanswered for you that you still would like to ask me that hasn't been answered or you're thinking about.
I'll go off something you just said. You said there's going to be some things you need to learn. So, walking around today, seems like you saw some things you might need to learn about, or walking in here, some things you might need to learn about. Can you speak to one of those and what a plan might be to come up to speed?
So in part of the learning, thinking about the different schools I visited first, in Bresnahan talking about trauma-informed education, because they've done a lot of work with that. And they're still determining how to do that process that well. So learning where they are and where they need to go next. Or learning about space needs at the middle school, and how do we be creative to make sure everyone has the correct space. So it's talking to leaders, it's talking to the schools, it's talking to the staff. Quite honestly, I've said this several times, I would give a questionnaire to all staff to ask things that I need to learn.
So, Let me push one more level.
Sure, go ahead.
We're bringing in a high school principal, brand new, who's never been a high school principal. And you have no high school principal experience. So how are you going to support a high school principal who's never been a high school principal?
There's ways we can do that. You can bring in a mentor. Bring in a high school mentor for sure.
Yeah.
And that would be something I'd like to do, obviously. So when you think about that, you think about needs and how you fill the need. And that's always what I've done with staff. What's the need? How do we best fill the need? But that's certainly the first direction I would point to. Because he's going to need it. He's going to need it. And I'll get a mentor as well. Because I'll need it.
If you were to receive an offer to come to the school district, what kind of commitment can you make?
I'm thinking at the very least 5 years commitment. The greatest achievements I felt I made as a leader with my staff was at the MacArthur Elementary School. I was there 5 years. I was there 5 years. Open to being longer.
I was going to ask you, have something you see yourself doing in 10 years that
It could be 10 years.
I don't want to pigeonhole.
No, but I want to, I want to answer it honestly too.
Yeah.
Because thinking about when you move from teacher to leader, it's a different school leader, principal. Same thing as superintendency. It's a wider audience that you have the ability to inspire. So it's going to take longer to do that well and build in your style and shared leadership and mechanisms and protocols and what have you, communication, whatever it is, to go ahead and do that. And to me, it would feel undone if it was anything less than 5 years, but I can see it being 5, 8, 10 years, 12 years, whatever it may be. As working with the school committee and sharing that same passion for the education and Newburyport, which obviously you do. You're an elected board. And on my end of it, I want to be that leader for a school system. And so, like I said, at the very least 5, I'm thinking, but it could be 8, 10. I see and have heard from staff and leaders today about when it was revolving and what that meant and what that means for the school system, and you lose traction and you lose momentum. And I take that seriously because I wouldn't want that to happen.
I'd like to bring up a question which I heard some of the people ask you about earlier today.
Okay.
I think it's important that all of us hear the answers that you gave. And that was, why do you believe that you are ready to take on a superintendency if you haven't been a assistant superintendent? That you're going from principalship to superintendent. Why do you think that's something doable for you?
Yeah, and I think part of my answer today, Nick, was that, when you become a building principal, I feel it's a lot of good practice for being a superintendent, because you're in the moment, you're the face of the school, you have to make decisions sometimes in the moment, and you have to communicate those decisions well within it's a smaller body, but it's the same level of communication. So whether it's something to celebrate, whether it's something that was a crisis at school during the day that has to be shared with them, you have to be able to share that in that moment. You don't have time, even with something like as tragic and outside of school where I was working, but when the day that Sandy Hook happened, I went to the front door of the school and sat there the entire day. Now that only meant that I thought I needed to be there because I felt this vulnerability from my school. And then when I talked to my school psychologist, we had a discussion about, what kind of message do I send home? Do I even have to send a message home today? That's something that happened far away. And this is when you lean on other people. So I was unsure. So I said to her, well, what do you think? She goes, I think a message is important today, Anthony. Come on, think about this for a second. And I did. I reflected on it. I said, yeah, you're right. So I had to craft a message in that moment that was clearly communicated about the safety of our school, the safety of our kids, how it was the utmost importance, and the little move I did sitting by the door, I felt I was doing a little bit more than I usually do. That happens in the superintendent role as well. You have to be able to make decisions in those moments sometimes, and you have to be the public face of an entire district now. So there are many lessons I learned, some of them through tragedy, some of them through challenge, some of them through success. I felt as a building leader, my power was always in my staff, not in the title of my position. As a district leader, it would be the same thing. It would be the power of my leadership and teaching staff within this district would be where my power was, my ability to model and inspire on all those levels. So if I model and inspire leadership staff as I did my own teaching staff, they will go back to their buildings and do the same, and have a point of reference to do that. So I think I've got a lot of experience that can be translated to superintendent. That's not to say that people who work in central office don't have experience that they can bring to it. It's just different experience. And I can help and support the principals for sure. I said, any one of you call me, of course I'm answering the phone and helping you in that moment, because I'd be reaching out for help you needed. And as a principal, as a 5th grade teacher, if I had an issue or a problem, I'd walk across the hall to Peggy, who was my my cohort, grade 5, and ask a question. As a principal, you have to pick up the phone. And if they're picking up the phone to call me, it's important to go through what's going on and how I can support them and help them, and have them feel comfortable in doing so.
Well, Anthony, we have reached the end of your hour. It was a pleasure meeting you. My understanding at this point is that the school committee will have some discussion at the end of the interviews tonight. We would like to set up some time for the community, another meeting for community members to come and have an opportunity to meet candidate, depending on where we are at the end of tonight, and visits, obviously, to school districts, where you have consulted to, is sort of where the process is, and then potentially final interviews. So that's where we are at this juncture.
Okay.
Okay?
Excellent.
Thank you so much. I appreciate your time today.
Thank you very much. Thanks. Appreciate it. Thanks for escorting me.
Hey, my pleasure.
Kept us on time all day today. Almost on time all day. Till the end. Mayor, we were pretty good most of the day.
I just took my hand in for 5 minutes of interviewing the mayor.
Thank you. I appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You all set?
I am.
Okay, so you have an hour, and we're going to rotate questions, and we're going to try to leave a little time at the end for you to ask us questions, and then anything else that someone would like to follow up on.
Great.
Okay, and so, everybody all set? All right, I'm going to start. Now that you have met members of our school and community and had the opportunity to tour the school district, what word or phrase would you use to describe our district and why?
Great pride.
Pride?
Pride, right away. Growing up on the North Shore, you have a sense of the Newburyport community, but throughout my day, I think the pride in the students that I met, there's pride in the teachers, community members, school committee. This is a district rich in pride, rich in tradition, and I got that sense. And I don't want to elaborate, but the school culture, we got a sense of a welcoming community in every single school that I went into today, and that takes a lot of work to have that great school culture. So that would be my one phrase for Newburyport, is a lot of pride. Ed Foundation and support, it was just pretty amazing. It's a great day for me. Thank you.
Steve?
Sure. Hi, Sean.
Hi.
Please describe a challenge you have recently met and the strategies used to sustain that accomplishment. Why is sustaining an accomplishment important to a school district's future?
That's great. I think multiple examples in my history as a building administrator, now as assistant superintendent, but I'll take a very recent accomplishment this year in Wilmington. So coming into Wilmington, which is a great community, some great teachers and administration. Coming into last year, we needed to really look at our teacher evaluation. We didn't have anything in place in the sense of the use of technology and programming to bring consistency throughout the district. So I think as assistant superintendent, taking a look at that, it's really crucial, because when you're looking at best practice and you're looking at teaching and learning, I think it's essential if we all can kind of be on the same page and really analyze teaching and learning 5 best practices. So that was one area of, I noticed that we could probably make some improvements. So the first aspect is we set up a subcommittee. We looked at Frontline, which is formerly My Learning Plan, which we utilized in Beverly for the teacher evaluation. And then we also analyzed and looked at TeachPoint, which is another teacher evaluation programming tool. And the committee decided, let's investigate TeachPoint, but what was really important for us is working with the union president. It was going to be kind of a shift. You still had the same system, but getting veteran teachers on board that was used to X2 or the Aspen was really important. What kind of complicated things a little bit is it was during negotiations of this year. And so coming in as the new guy into this district as the assistant superintendent, some people suggested, why don't you, kind of put that off the side because of teacher negotiations. And I felt there was a need of the district, and I thought this would be good for teachers, it would be good for the administration, and it would bring a lot of consistency to the district. And so working with the union, we developed a memorandum of agreement. We proposed this to the veteran teachers. We piloted last year. We added more teachers this year. And really, we have everybody on board. And with a system like that, teachers receive feedback instantly or right after the observation. So one of the, being in the district, one of the concerns for teachers is with the evaluation, they weren't receiving immediate feedback. And this program has really allowed that to happen. So now we're focusing really on the instruction in the classroom collectively. Everybody's moving in the right direction. So that was, I think, a smaller accomplishment. And then obviously a big accomplishment was our one-to-one laptop initiative in Beverly. We were the first comprehensive high school to go to a lease-to-own model, and we were actually one of the first comprehensive high schools to have this one-to-one laptop initiative. And we were out front, and it was a lot of work with that, with the community, with the parents, to make that program very successful. So there's a lot of different examples, but I think that kind of ties into my leadership where working with the teachers union and a lot of the stakeholders within the community, bringing people to the table and really just articulating what's good for students and teachers has been pretty much a strength of mine. All right.
David?
Can I just push on that a little bit?
Sure.
Because what you talked about was process and things that needed to get done, and you did them.
Mm-hmm.
But the question, and my question dovetails also into personnel and evaluation, that sort of thing.
Right.
We were asking about challenges.
Mm-hmm.
So can you maybe go one step further and tell us
Sure.
what made some of this difficult, other than it had to get done? I mean, doing it that
yeah, I think that there's two pieces. One, I think the circumstance with negotiations and kind of working with the union during some tough times, that was the difficult piece of getting the program. The more essential piece is the 5 best practices. Really working with teachers and administrators to identify those. So that's, in any classroom, you'll be able to observe these 5 at any point. So that's the objectives, clear objectives, with the exemplars of student work. You'll be looking for frequently checking for understanding, a lot of different formative assessments within the classroom. You look for varied instruction, especially in a long block with an 84-minute block. You're looking for various ways of teachers to instruct. Very important is scaffolding, taking complex problem solving or complex issues and having the teacher break those down and scaffold. And then the back end of a great practice is the review and the summary. So with the Teach Point initiative and programming, then that's going back, and maybe I should have been more clear, is then going back and really focusing on what the best practices are. So working with the administration and the principals, and also working with the teachers on these are the best practices. And really, we also utilize videos, and we had teachers utilize our walkthrough forms that we were, with our observations on walkthroughs, and then have them do a walkthrough, observing a teacher video, and then going through as an observer, and really trying to show them the benefits of that. So that was really important. The other piece that we had to come together on is what are these forms going to look like? What are we evaluating? So there was a lot of work with the teachers in developing those forms. So if that's helpful.
No, it's very helpful.
Okay.
So like I said, my question is about personnel evaluation
Sure.
and dovetailing with a professional development strategy
Yes.
so that teachers can get meaningful feedback on their efforts, and specifically how are we going to use that to operationalize the strategic plan, and how are we going to make sure that teachers get supported in all these things. So if you're going to name these are the 5 instructional keys,
Correct.
how are we going to help bring that to life
Yeah.
and see it on the ground in action?
That's perfect, and I know you have PLC's implementation here. So when you're talking best practice and you have that collaboration time that's built in, it should be structured and really identifying what does that look like? What do these 5 practices look like in the classroom, and having teachers kind of work through those practices. I think professional development is the route to success. So any type of initiative, program, you're really going to provide the support for the teachers, ongoing support and ongoing resources for them to be successful. And there's various initiatives that we implemented and were successful, but it all came back to the professional development. I think it's, if we go back to teacher evaluation, for example, we have a lot of initiatives. When I went into Wilmington as the assistant superintendent, we had a 52-page strategic plan. So when I asked for the strategic plan to see where we were at as a district, it was 52 pages long, that's a pretty long strategic plan.
Something like that.
Yes. So I think what we had to do in working with the leadership team and the principals is let's kind of look at the strategic plan and let's focus on a few of these initiatives, kind of scale that back, and let's do these well. So what we did, for example, for the principals, and we all started to move in the right direction in the sense of the student learning goal was to close the proficiency gaps, right? Which is typically, for every district, we're always looking at that data and how we're going to close those gaps. Our second goal as a district, we looked at our professional practice goal. So for grades 6 to 12, we're curriculum mapping. We're using the UBD template and really identifying our standards collectively on what we needed to do. For the elementary schools, we have a reading initiative, balanced literacy. So there was a lot of these initiatives that were tied into the strategic plan, but we kind of, let's focus on our Readers Workshop initiative. So their professional practice practice goal was to really focus on teachers and professional development to make sure that reading initiative was going to be supported. District-wide, we focused on 2 other goals. We focused on social emotional health. So at the middle school and the high school level, we focused on the MARC program, our bullying program, and culture building program for grades 6 to 12. At the elementary school, we had a PBIS initiative that we had for their district-wide goal was PBIS, have them focus on the PBIS initiative. And then what we really wanted to do, especially with some of the turmoil in Wilmington, we had a lot of changes, is really celebrate success. Celebrate the great things that we were doing. That was our 4th district goal. And so celebrate student success, celebrate teacher success, really elevate some of the great practices that are going on. So that was the first time the leadership team really focused together. So we took a lot of those initiatives, those 52-page initiatives, and we kind of bullet pointed, these are the ones that we want to accomplish. These are the ones we want to do well. So we tied all of that also into that. And then that, for the teachers, also took some of the pressure off of them. So your elementary teachers were focusing on Readers Workshop, balanced literacy strategy at the elementary level. And then the teachers at the grade 6 to 12 are focusing on curriculum mapping. And we're always focusing on closing the achievement gap. And that looks a little bit different at each school.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So, this question sort of tries to get an understanding for your problem-solving skills. Describe a situation where you face serious differences between stakeholders. A time when resources are limited, whether it be time or money, there's often conflict among stakeholders down there. And so there's a conflict with the stakeholders about an application or a program that was important to your job. What were those differences, and then how did you address them?
Great. So many. Yeah, school administrator, a lot of times, I think a successful leader can bring parties together, find common ground, and really any decision that I have ever made has always been in the best interest of students, and families. And that's been, I think, kind of our success is if we're going to make a decision, we're going to focus on what's best for students. Sometimes we disagree on how we're going to get there, but I think if we always focus on students, then we can never go wrong. I will give you an example that was, as a building principal, we had the one-to-one initiative. We had our building project at the time, and then we had a high school schedule change. Through our NEASC accreditation, when I became a principal in 2007, my first year, those were what we were facing. Building challenge and the schedule changes. We had, through our NEASC accreditation, a lot of study halls, a lot of downtime. At one point, when you looked at our schedule, 1,200 students in study halls during the school day. That was a lot. Too much. So what we did is we brought all the stakeholders together, teachers. We looked at various schedules. We sent out some teams. So we had, when you looked at our schedule, we had a hybrid schedule. We had a traditional schedule for specialists, and then you had a block schedule for content areas. So what was happening through our accreditation review, our top students, the 200 students in all the AP classes, were getting the most instructional time, and they were receiving the most resources. So when you're looking at equity across the board, our struggling students weren't getting those same resources. So as we developed collectively for a schedule change, we were bringing a block schedule, a 4x4 alternating day for all classes. So all classes, from the honors to the AP, the college prep classes, we're going to get the same schedule. That was a major shift for the community, major shift for a lot of the parents. We're really concerned with what the AP scores. Are they going to be down? Are we, what's going to happen here? And we showed a lot of research. We had community meetings with the parents. It was a lot of work. And as we implemented the new schedule, I think we did a wonderful job in bringing everyone to the table. We still had people that were in disagreement, like this was going to work, this was going to benefit all students. They thought that a lot of the AP scores were going to go down, and it just had the opposite effect. It brought equity for teachers, equity for all students, and having the longer blocks, you can do a lot more work in that. So that was, I would think that was one area where we were really divided. We brought people together from the students to the community, to the parents, and we were pretty successful with that. There's probably 12 others I could give you, but I think that was one that just came to my mind too. It was very sensitive. Anytime you're looking at a schedule change within a school, it's a lot of work needs to go into that.
We're all done that a few times here recently.
Brian?
It's about technology, and I saw the Beverly one-to-one. Sure. Awesome. So you have a experience on the higher grades, what is your vision for implementing and integrating technology across all grades, pre-K?
Yeah, I mean,
What are the challenges and pitfalls of a comprehensive technology policy?
that's a great question, and I think this is a scary time for education, and it's an exciting time for education, as we all know. I think we have to be at the forefront of technology, and if you just, we did the one-to-one in Beverly, which was the lease-to-own MacBook, and in Wilmington, we have a Chromebook initiative. So I'm experiencing two rollouts, two different devices, totally different plans for both communities, and they work well in both. The number one, if we're looking at our students today, some of the last research I've seen is the biggest market for technology is ages 2 to 4. That's the biggest market. So we have kindergarten students that are coming into the preschool and kindergarten, that's their life. That is what they're used to. That is what they're using. And I think for us as educators, that's our challenge. It's how to incorporate the use of technology within the curriculum, but it never replaces great teaching. It's a tool to be used to really enhance the curriculum throughout. I think it's really important for us to, as educators, as we bring in technology into the classroom, I think it has to be in that role as a tool, and I think we have to offer the staff true professional development. And going back to our rollout in Beverly, we did 3 years of professional development with teachers before the students were sitting in front of them with laptops. In Wilmington, coming into the system, grade 9 was last year, this year is grade 8, 9, and 10. In the professional development, there was not a lot of professional development. So we're stepping back and having that experience in professional development to support the teachers within the curriculum. We're kind of scaling that back and developing professional development. We had a lot of summer workshops. Teacher to teacher professional development is the best. So we had some Beverly teachers work with the Wilmington teachers in content-specific areas. I think you have the overview of Google Classroom, Google Applications. You have the use of Moodle, which is really nice. But I think for the teachers, they want to know, how is this going to work in chemistry class? How is this going to work in Algebra 1? How is this going to work at grade 4? So I think when you bring content teachers or grade level teachers and have teachers teaching teachers how to use the technology to enhance the instruction, I think that's really important. I think on the other side, for us, we really focus on the use of technology with students, and we have different programs. We have EverFi, which is a free program that works on social media, cyberbullying. It's a great program that we have implemented in Wilmington. You also have district attorney Blodgett's Think Before You Send, a whole program on bullying. And then what we did for our college career readiness, we tied in our, within our freshman programming, personal finance, where there was a whole unit in, I want to say 2 or 3 weeks on social media, on posting, on Facebook. So I think the use of technology is it's what we need to be implementing, because it's that 21st century learning, and for us, we need to be competitive in the global. I mean, I always look at it as local and then globally, and we know China, Singapore, Brazil, these countries pushing the envelope, and we know that China right now is looking to control the world economy. So for us, the one piece that we have in the United States is we have the ability to be innovative, creative, and independent. And we need to take that innovation for this generation and then have them be the forefront for all of us and to lead that. And I think that starts, within the school system. So,
Great, Mike.
I hope that answered a lot of your questions.
John?
Yes.
Oh, Sean. I'm Sean Reardon. Nice to meet you, Sean.
Nice to meet you.
Okay, so here's my
Sorry,
question.
we should do that.
We didn't do introductions.
There you go.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too.
I love you personally. So my question's going to be around communications and generating support. So how do you communicate and make yourself visible in the school system and community? And how do you use that visibility to build positive and collaborative culture across a district pre-K to 12? How do you gain support for schools and the communities you have worked? And how big a role do you think communication plays?
It's essential, and I think my style, I build personal relationships. I still enjoy talking to people. I'm working with a lot of our administrators on, I think email is a nice vehicle for housekeeping items and keeping people informed. But I think when you talk in any type of personnel matter, any type of family matter, student matter, parent matter, I think you need to call people. I think that is essential. I think when there are issues with families or students or parents, I think you bring them to your office and you talk to people. I think that is essential. I'll give you a specific example. I mean, there's a lot of examples, but I'll give you one for our budget process this year. So for the Readers Workshop Initiative in Wilmington at the elementary level, there was a lot of, as we say, a lot of initiatives placed on the elementary teachers. So coming into Wilmington, the feedback I was getting was, we like this program. One, we're not getting a lot of professional development. We want to do this, but we're not getting a lot of professional development, and we don't have the resources for this. So that was what I was hearing. My style, I visit classrooms all the time. I did that as a high school principal, and as the assistant superintendent, my first week within the school system, I went out and I visited many classrooms, and which I didn't know, but you have in the previous, if you have an assistant superintendent who didn't go out and visit a lot of classrooms, and my first week I'm out visiting classrooms, I scared a lot of people by mistake. And I'm saying, I'm just here to be supportive, to see how things are going, especially the opening week of school is really important. But I developed, I think, that rapport to be in the buildings, to not necessarily be evaluative. I think there's always time for evaluation and observation. I'm just in there to be support, to kind of see what was going on. What I noticed were the Wilmington teachers that were established and had connections with their community. Their classroom libraries kind of look like this. They're beautiful. Some of our newer teachers who were just hired, who didn't have those resources, their classroom libraries were lacking. So they're trying to, with the Readers Workshop Initiative, have classroom libraries, and they were right. There was not enough resources. So as we were developing our budget, that was a priority. And the teachers are right. How can we do this initiative if we don't have the resources to support it? So this year, as part of our budget operations, that was the number one priority. We put $12,000 towards the Readers Workshop classroom libraries for all the teachers. And then we also work with our Ed Foundation to, they're going to implement it too with our resources. But that's one example. If I was not in the buildings and I heard of just that, oh, we need resources, and not seeing the impact on those teachers and the students, then maybe you don't put money there because you really don't understand the urgency. And I think that's really, really important. You know, just the other day, I was we have Envision's math program that we implemented at the middle school, and I was visiting classrooms, and one of the teachers pulled me aside and said, this was her comment, she loves Envision's math, scope and sequence, she loves the program, but she said, it's too worksheet heavy. And I'm like, all right, well, what do you want to do? She goes, well, we don't need to do all these worksheets, we should be doing these other pieces, more formative assessments. I was like, well, go ahead. I'm not stopping you to do that. And I think having these conversations on a daily basis is really important. So I think there are sometimes pounding back and listening to teachers and students and families is really important. I think you need to support the community and what's going on a daily basis. And I see myself visible as a superintendent in Newburyport. I think you will see me not only in buildings, at different events, and being really part of the community. And I fully understand being assistant superintendent and dealing with a lot of responsibilities. I think that sometimes, especially during the budget season, you really need to schedule your time in those buildings because you are running, the school system, and there are going to be some times where if it's negotiations or if it's budget time, that you have time in the buildings may not be as often, but I think it's really important that you schedule that time. Yeah. Thank you. All right.
Good segue into the budget.
Okay.
Here's some facts. The school budget comprises approximately 50% of our city budget. We receive only about $2 million in Chapter 70 funding, state allocation fund, and to fund a $28 million operational budget. Our community has supported significant capital projects, 3 debt exclusion votes, but has not approved an operational override. What would be your process for developing our annual school budget, and could you share your thoughts and ideas on creating new revenue streams?
Yes. Well, I in the packet that you may have seen before or not, I kind of developed a template on how I would go about a budget process. This was a kind of a successful process that we utilized in Wilmington, and a town and city operate differently. I'm more accustomed to a city being Salem and Beverly. But really start that whole budget process of working and kind of in the beginning in September, kind of getting some numbers from the state, where we kind of ballpark kind of where we're at in the beginning of September. We would then send out our budget guidelines to our budget managers and principals, where they would start to prioritize their budget. I created in there just some Excel spreadsheets on staffing increases or line items, capital projects, that this little packet from each manager, building manager, budget manager would submit. And so then we would kind of go through that, meet individually first, which I think is really, really important. Within there, it kind of outlines the rationale for increases in line items. So I would meet with all of our budget managers individually with the team of business manager, assistant superintendent, and we would go through that first process. The second process, which I think is really important, is bringing all of the stakeholders to the table. And as we're developing the budget and the budget guidelines, is to really support the strategic plan for the district. I think that's really, really important. My goal would be in November or so to meet with all of the budget managers throughout the district in a room where we would all share those proposals together. And then we would kind of look at district priorities of kind of where we're at. And prioritize, I think, where we might need some increases or where we could decrease in looking at staff. From there, in December, I think we would kind of have a preliminary, hopefully, overall budget that we would present just as a draft, a preliminary draft possibly to the school committee in December, and then work with the city to see, so if it was a 4% increase or if it was a 3% increase, if we came in at 4, working with the city council, and maybe wherever that number winds up, could be 4, could be 2, and then collectively work with the business side and the city side in developing that overall budget, and then continue to vet that budget process until we have with the school committee, the mayor, where we're kind of at that process. I know working in a city is a little bit different. So this was kind of a town development. I know working within the city, sometimes that budget process, although you'd like to have it done earlier, you're still waiting for that last Chapter 70 money coming in, or you're still working it out. So I know, like in 2008 to 10, some of our finalized budget for schools were not being finalized till June overall. So what I would do is, just like I've done in all the districts I've worked in, is kind of takes those draft and those ideas and adapt it to the budget process here. And not, well, this is where I do my budget. So I think it's learning how the budget process is done in Newburyport and working with the business manager. That's kind of some ideas on philosophy, how I bring people together. And then we would tie every line item in every school to that strategic plan and priorities. I think that's really important. Additional funding, I think, has always been, we go back to doing what's best for students, for example. And so we never, as a building principal and administrator, if it was good for students and families, we would get it done. So even if there was not funding there, we would work on some grassroots implementation. And we were fortunate, we did a lot of 21st century running. We wrote in a 28-page grant. So I think we were also grant writers in the sense of having an idea what we want to do for students and then write additional grants. So we wrote a federal grant, a small learning communities grant, and we were one of 28 high schools in the country to receive it. And the reason why we received it is because we had some grassroots programming going on. We were personalized learning at the high school level. We were looking at transition from grade 8 to grade 9 and looking at freshman academy. We were looking at the increase of technology. So we had a lot of this grassroots piloting at a low level, and we saw this small learning communities grant, federal grant, that tied into our vision of where we wanted to move the high school. So we spent a long time writing that grant. We submitted it, working with CSSR and Joe DiMartino's team, and we got a $1.2 million 5-year grant, which really helped us with professional development. The other piece is when we started to roll out our one-to-one, we knew that some of our economically disadvantaged students, although we had a tier on subsidizing some of that programming, we felt like we needed more. In the Cummings grant that we wrote when we were in Beverly, we spent time writing a Cummings technology grant for $100,000 that supported and subsidized some of our economically disadvantaged families. As part of the Small Learning Communities Grant, part of it was sustainability. How are you going to sustain, and as you know, Mayor, of a lot of these federal grants, they want sustainability. So we'll give you the money, but how are you going to sustain it? So that's when we were looking down the road, how are we going to do this? We wrote a couple more grants, we didn't receive them, and that's when we brought in, we looked at the Educations program that we brought into Beverly High School. It's a great program. It did two things for us. We were not as diverse as my previous job in working in Salem as a community. We had diversity with economically disadvantaged, but predominantly we did not have a lot of various cultures at Beverly High School. And so we utilized the Educations exchange program, one, to bring diversity into the school system, and two, it was an additional revenue that we could utilize. So with the Educations program, typically families will pay their per pupil expenditure. So at that time, I think it was around $15,000 that we brought in, around 10 students. So the district, we had $150,000 that we utilized to sustain a lot of those great initiatives of professional development. So it's the old saying, where there's a will, there's a way. And I think if it's good for students, and this is where we want to move, obviously the budget would be great if we could get that support, but I think there's other avenues that can be pursued. And a lot of the grants, for example, our behavior health director, we wrote a substance abuse grant. The state, we got $10,000 to address substance abuse issues that we're all dealing with, as we all know, with the heroin epidemic. So that was in Wilmington. We had some programs in place, so we tied that programming in to the grant, and we received a $10,000 behavioral health grant focused on substance abuse. So I think that as a superintendent and working with the assistant superintendent in central office and the community, I think there's different funding resources out there that you pursue. And when we were 2 for 2 for grants, I thought, oh, this was easy. And then we wrote a few others and we put a lot of work into them. We wrote a grant that I thought it was for supporting military families. We had a great, some military families in Beverly, and so we put together this wonderful grant that would have provided a lot of support for our military families, but we didn't get that one. So, but I think it's just really looking at how to support, how to support the great teaching and learning that's going on.
Thank you.
Yes.
We'd like to you, Steve.
Thank you. A leadership system is described as how decisions are made. What is your leadership system, and how would you replicate it at all levels in the school district? If you would not replicate it at all levels, why not?
Well, I think, number one, you have to lead by example. The old saying, if you talk the talk, you need to walk the walk. So if we're talking about being visible, personal relationships, talking to people, having meetings, that's my leadership style. That's what I will do. I think for any organization, and I've had various leadership, I've been working with students since I've been 19 years old. I started off as the youngest wrestling coach in Salem High history at 19. And so from 19 to almost 30 years, my birthday's in March, so don't do the math. But for 30 years, I've been working with students and families in all different capacities and dealing with a lot of different social issues that have come up. 10 years ago, we weren't talking about social emotional learning as an initiative throughout the state. So we weren't talking about the fast and furious. We were planning on the use of technology, but as we all know, it's fast and furious. So I think you need to be to adapt. But I think within any organization, the number one key, in my experience, is I think role clarity for everybody. I think that's essential. As my role as a superintendent or as assistant superintendent is very important. The role of school committee is is very important, role of teachers. And I think role clarity, it really helps the whole organization to stay focused and to move forward. And I've never, even when there's disagreements, I think everyone has good intentions. I think I can sift through sometimes and look at criticism as a good intention, but sometimes when we're concerned to solve a problem at whatever level we have, the impact on the organization can be negative, can come across negative. And I think for all of us, I think we all have our roles within the organization. And if we always stay on doing what's best for students and doing what's best for families, and that's our decision, driving force, I think we always can find common ground. So I think my leadership style, I like to bring people to the table, and I think eventually you have to make a decision. I think what's really important is after the decision you make, good, bad, or indifferent, I think it's really important for the leader to kind of go back around and to check in with the people who may not be happy with that decision and see how they're doing with whatever the decision was done. And I think I've done a nice job with that to really circle back and work with people. This is still a people business, and what works in one community and what's successful in one community may not work in another community. And I think that's really, really important, especially with initiatives in education. I think you really need to understand the community, you need to understand the relationships before you start a new initiative.
Thank you.
All right, you're welcome.
David?
All right, we're going to talk about curriculum.
Sure.
How will you inspire faculty to use a variety of data when crafting and refining students' day-to-day classroom experiences so that students have the needed opportunities to prepare for their futures and demonstrate at least proficiency within all the Massachusetts curriculum frameworks?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think what's really important, and probably what I utilize, I think, all the time as the assistant superintendent is staff surveys. Just the old Google form at the end of the day, I can find out how professional development went. We survey, we have a professional development committee that's made up of administrators and teachers, and it's really important for us every year to send out a survey to get feedback from the teachers on what areas of professional development that they need. And then that helps us craft our agenda going into the next year or even immediate. The Readers Workshop Initiative, we did a survey mid-year, which last year was extremely beneficial. We got feedback from the staff that they were happy they got the resources, but they wanted more coaching. They wanted more coaching in the classroom. They felt that they understood the implementation, they understood the strategies of the Readers Workshop Balanced Literacy Program, but they really needed a coach and someone to see them teach, to give them feedback. That was great. That was great feedback to get, and we would not have received that if we just assumed things were going well. I think when you're looking at where we need to go, I think we started this shift focusing on college and career readiness. Like, what is that essential question? If we backwards design that, when a Newburyport student graduates from Newburyport High School, what is the skill set that they're going to need to be successful in college or successful in their careers? And then as we develop those essential skills, and it's probably going to be a lot of your mission statement. It's going to be creativity, innovation, being collaborative. So what does that look like as we go down to pre-K and all the way up? Are we giving students opportunities in the classroom to be leaders, to show leadership, to present? Are we giving them an opportunity in the class to revise work, to take an opposite argument? So I think for us, as we're developing the standards and looking at the Massachusetts frameworks, it's really developing, tying that into real-world applications. And for us to define when a student from Newburyport High School graduates, that we all feel confident that, as you said, the basic level of proficiency, the skills academic set, but yet has the ability to be successful in college and career ready. And I believe there are certain things we've done in the past, but one of the big pieces that we did is when we look at success in college, a lot of the data will show that if a student can graduate high school with having at least 1 or 2 college courses under their belt before they graduate, they will, is that the 2-minute warning?
Actually, it's about 7, but.
Okay, so basically we brought dual enrollment. We partnered with Endicott College and we brought dual enrollment to the high school for juniors and seniors. So they have an opportunity to take 4 college classes with no charge. We utilized funding through the education program, which helps because if you're a parent, and my daughter's a freshman in college now, which she took a couple more of those classes. But so it helps parents because those courses, what we selected through Endicott College, were those general elective courses. So if you went to MIT, Bridgewater State, you're applying to Harvard, those general psych and sociology courses would transfer over. So I think that's a really important aspect, is to have real world experience, like a senior internship before they leave, and then some type of college program.
Segueing off of that, when you take on the presidency to the selected candidate, there will be about 2 years of implementation left on our current strategic plan. So I guess it's two-part question. How would you support that strategic plan? The second part is, what is the process that you would put into place for developing the next edition?
Right, and I think that's really important. So, as part of the entry plan, for my entry plan to become superintendent here, if I was honored to be here as the superintendent, I would start working on that entry plan right away. And that's meeting with a lot of different stakeholders within the community, the teachers, getting individual meetings, focus groups, to really get a sense of the community, to really get a sense of the strategic plan and where we're at with that, and maybe there's tweaking of that. And then I think I would take that same process where the Rotary Club, the businesses, which were key, is I think a key within any school system, and really start to develop the strategic plan, bring in a lot of different subcommittees together. Very similar to your subcommittees there. And when I read the names and the different, you have staff members, you have community members, you have students. That doesn't happen in a lot of districts of writing strategic plans, of having that much involvement. So I would probably continue that same process, and we would really, I think, start to define as this strategic plan can continue to enhance some of the great things that are going on, and then start moving towards some new challenges down the road. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Brian?
This is regarding accountability. What have you done in your previous jobs to increase and ensure a high degree of accountability at faculty, school, district, and greater community level?
That's a great question. I think it's really important to be clear of expectations if we're talking for staff and administration. And I think tying in, for example, when I talked about the SMART goals, really kind of tying everybody into those SMART goals with the responsibility. So if, for us as a district, if we're looking and focusing on 21st century learning skills and the use of technology, there would probably be with a minimum expectation from the faculty to administration to superintendency on what's that going to look like. And I think it's really important to have an understanding of where people are at and meet them halfway. So I think that's really important, especially if you're looking to move people forward. And I'll tell you, this school system, we used to always talk with our faculty, good is the enemy of great. So when you're very good, I think it's really important for the superintendent, leadership team, to really talk about why change. Because if I'm a teacher and I've been very good for all these years, I think it's really important, why are we changing? And I think that is very important to communicate to the faculty. The why and the how and the what is important. And it's not just at one faculty meeting. I think it becomes part of your culture on all of us focusing on the different initiatives.
I think we have time for one more question.
Sure. Hopefully I got through most of your questions.
Would you rather do yours last
No,
one?
but I think Sean talked a little bit about
Well,
partnerships.
partnerships.
We got a little set ahead to
Yeah,
that. I think
yeah.
we haven't touched on special ed.
Okay.
Okay, so last question.
Sure.
Special ed. Special education costs are such a significant portion of our school budget. What are your experiences working with special education? And have you any experience finding creative ways to provide and to fund proper services for all children in the district?
Yeah. Well, for years, I worked as a special education teacher at the Alternative High School for a few years there. I think special education costs, I'll look at it as an educator first. I think any time that you can provide services for the Newburyport families and the students, where you can develop programming so students are successful, I think that has to be the main focus on students first. There are some times that outside placement, there are some situations in learning needs of students that you need to utilize an outside placement program. For us, we always felt of keeping as many of our students within, because it's their school, it's their school district, it's the families. I think that has to be a priority. We restructured a lot of I'm going to say a lot, but we restructured our programming at Beverly High School, where we had a couple separate programs and that were no longer being effective of the social and emotional learning needs. So we kind of restructured our resources and developed a tiered program, tiered 1, 2, and 3, where we had more student success. And so a lot of the students, some of our social emotional students that were having to go out of district because we didn't have the programming, we restructured that and the students stayed in this program. And Tier 3 was more sub-separate with the ability to go from Tier 3 to a 1 within that program. It's a great program, and we brought some Wilmington staff over to take a look at it because that's kind of what we were looking to do. I think that the second aspect for us is we developed a co-teaching model. In the beginning, we piloted that in the sub-separate programs with success, and then we ended up moving those programs into the mainstream, and teachers were thriving. We had a need. I'll just talk to these 2 other programs we did. We had a STAY program, Successfully Transitioning At-Risk Youth. So that acronym took me a year to make up, but that's what we call it, Stay in School. But that program, we didn't have an alternative high school. We didn't have a modified schedule. So this program started off as a credit recovery, but then also kind of an alternative program after school, where we created a math and science teacher. We had math and science one day, we had English and history, we had content area teachers, supported by a adjustment counselor and a special education teacher. So what we could do is some of our social emotional learners outside placement, we could bring them back. What was really important with that is we had an ROTC program within our building. So although it was an after-school program, some of our students took advantage of the high school programming, like an elective, like a ROTC program, and then they went into the after-school program. So not only did we save, I think, funding from a school committee point of view, but we really were saving students and educating them within their town, which was really important to us. So I think it's kind of looking at the special education program, looking at where students are going and why they're going, and really just restructuring some of that, the resources that you already have to pull people back into the district. So I think that's always, the special education costs are, it's always a big topic, but I think that with the right program and the right people, I think you can bring a lot of students back to the district. So that would be something, obviously, that we would take a real
increase funding of circuit breaker.
Yeah.
Any thought about how to re-examine your special ed programs?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, I know we're winding down here, but in Wilmington, for example, we had, I think you look at your special education teachers and their strengths. So we hired a teacher last year that worked very well in another district, an autistic program. And we had, working with our student support services, we have a need for that. And we have some students that we couldn't service because we didn't have the programming for that. So understanding, for example, this teacher's strengths in special education and the background of working with autistic children and being successful there, we kind of saw that talent and we felt like we might be able to bring 3 or 4 students and create a new program utilizing the skill set of that teacher. And we have. And the teacher is an amazing teacher. But I think it's kind of looking at that district-wide and kind of reallocating the resources there. So if that answers the question. Yeah.
Thank you, Sean. I just want to end with one question.
Sure.
If you were offered the position, how long would you make a commitment to stay in the position of superintendent?
That's a great question. And if you look at my track record, I had a long career as a teacher coach in Salem. I then became an administrator, and I think I had a long tenure as a building principal in Beverly. And now, for me personally, I was very fortunate to have a stabilizing central office. I was very fortunate to work for Dr. Levine, who was my beginning as an athletic director and dean of students. And then I was very fortunate to work for Jim Hayes, who was a superintendent in Beverly for many years. And then unfortunately, we had some changeover. In my last 6 years, we were talking about this earlier, I've worked for 6 different superintendents as building principal and also as an assistant superintendent. So one of my reasons for getting involved in the central office is when it's not stable, it has that trickle-down effect on kind of everybody, from principals to teachers to the community. And when you're talking about a collaborative community like Newburyport is, people kind of move back into their own schools and they don't really want to put themselves out there and collaborate. So for me personally, I'm looking at, this is kind of like my 3rd stage of my career, my educational career, central office. And I've been extremely selective on superintendent searches in the community. So I'm looking at a fit, and if I was offered, I would like to stay here and be here, hopefully for 10 years or longer. So I'm not looking to stay here and then move. If I'm given the opportunity, I think, I have a lot to learn about the community and work with all the stakeholders But I'd like to be here for a long time, or as long as you want me here. So,
Sean, thank you. I
All right.
appreciate your time.
thank you.
The process at this point is we're going to have some conversation
Sure.
after you leave, and we anticipate setting up, because there are more members of the community and school community that would like to meet the candidates.
Great.
And that will probably occur after school break next week.
All right.
And then visits to the school districts. So, and then final interview. That's sort of what we're looking at this juncture.
Okay, great.
Certainly, people will be in touch with you about that process. I'm not sure if it's Bruce or probably Carolyn Burke.
Okay.
From NASDAQ.
Sure.
But I'm going to end with introducing you to members of the school committee.
All right.
I apologize for that up front. Steve Cole, Sean Reardon, Brian Callahan, David Hockheiser, Nick DeCanter, and Vice Chair Bruce Bennett.
All right.
Thank you so much for your time.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you.
I know it was a long day for you.
It's been an honor to be through this whole process. So at this point, I just want to thank you all in the community for giving me this opportunity. So.
Thank you, Sean.
All right. Thanks, John.
So, at this juncture, I would like to leave it open for conversation at this point. Do we continue moving forward with both candidates? Do we not? Do we? Do we need more time to think about it?
I just don't know if I want to start.
I think both of the candidates bring a very different set of skill sets. There's no question about that to the table. And trying to determine whether one is a better fit than the other in terms of meeting the needs that our school district has. I don't feel as of right now, and I've had just a little bit more of an opportunity than some of you because they came to my office and we just chatted for a little bit. We didn't get into a lot of the detailed questions that we're going to be asked tonight. I don't feel ready to make a decision one way or the other on either candidate. I feel like I need more information, more time. I would like to talk to people who work with both candidates, visit places, and see where we are at that point.
I would agree. I did have the opportunity to observe one of the candidates for a fair amount of the day today, because I was his schedule keeper and prodder-in-chief. I still think there are things that I would like to understand more about the candidate that I toured today, and also about Sean, who I did not really have much exposure to until right now. Both very different. I think neither one, in my mind right now, is a slam dunk and saying, wow, this is the person I would want to have immediately. I don't know enough to be able to say that right now. But I also feel I'm not in a position like you, Mayor, to say I would want to disqualify either one of them at this point. They both come to us with gaps and weaknesses as well as strengths and opportunities. And we need to think about that in the context of the district and what our district needs are going to be. Can we make it balance appropriately for us? So I would agree that some more time and another set of interviews would not be a waste of time.
It's too important. Thank you. Anyone else?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with what you both said. I mean, I think it can't hurt to get one. I'm definitely preferring one over the other, but I mean, I think another line of questioning. I have a question for Bruce, actually. Bruce, can you hear me?
I can hardly hear you.
Hardly. So speak up loudly.
It's more questioning through the screening process, I guess, how we got to these two people. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear that now.
Okay, so did you
You have some
guys,
questions?
I know Cheryl talked a little bit about what the interview looked like when you got down to the 9 finalists or whatnot. Did you drill down more into the resumes then and ask really specific questions about the resumes, or were they more big picture questions?
Yeah, more specifically, we wanted to get a sense of what their experiences were. We did use the resumes to guide us in those questions, and we did ask some more specific questions.
Okay, I was just curious. But yeah, no, I would, again, like
Do you have that folder of the questions? Bruce, there was a folder at the last school committee meeting. Did that contain the search committee's responses to questions?
I don't think so.
Bruce, because everything we did was an executive session, they collected everything, remember? Everything we did was
Yeah, my
executive session.
understanding is that
They took everything.
NASDAQ compiled everything we had, but probably eliminated the feedback on candidates that we didn't send forward. They may still have something.
She was
And I can find out. I can contact them tomorrow.
But remember when Carolyn stood up and she said, I have everything, it was a manila folder that you should make available for all of you to have access to. Remember, this is now a public document. I don't know what was in that folder, and I was just curious.
Okay.
And if it's something that we probably should all make a point of getting over to central office to browse through. If it's something that has additional information from the search committee that we should look at. If you could check on that, that would be appreciated.
Sure.
Okay. Anyone else?
We also got some feedback sheets that some have come in, others, yet to arrive and will be compiled, and I think there's some perspective to, review there as well. So I'd be in favor of some further interviews, some further process, and maybe distilling out some questions from what we've learned tonight.
Okay, thank you.
I'm going to
Brian?
go with group, same thing. I don't know how an hour is no time. Especially for me, in the deep end here for the first time, so I gotta at least talk to them one more time. Yeah.
David?
I'm nervous. I don't think one of them has the experience. I don't know that the other guys, that doesn't make the other guy, a slam dunk candidate. But I don't think one of them's been in the classroom enough, and I don't think he's been in enough schools.
Oh, I completely agree with that.
I've worked with superintendents who come from a limited grade level, and when they walk into the other buildings, they just don't have their legs under them. And I don't think being a leader is the same thing as being a leader. It just doesn't always translate. And so if I had the choice, that doesn't mean that eventually he wouldn't grow into it, or he's not a great person. I liked some of his answers, but I would be very hesitant, regardless of his charisma or consultancy in different schools. I would be very hesitant to move somebody forward who's never worked in a middle school or a high school, and has only been in the classroom for, I think, 6 years. I just, okay.
That's fine.
I'd give you a little bit of feedback. Both of these candidates, I sort of echo what Nick had to say, both of these candidates have areas that they simply don't have a lot of experience in. And those areas tend to be more of the sort of management stuff that goes into operating a school system. So moving forward with both or either of these candidates, if we're serious about this, obviously we are looking at bringing in somebody who is going to need some additional support. I don't know, whether the mentoring process that Mask does will provide enough of that, whether there's additional training. I don't know how we would do that, but I recognize that we would need to do that. That having been said, those are not the only needs that the district has. And I think that I'm comfortable with the level of experience around change and culture that each of these candidates has in terms of moving both forward. I'm not prepared at this point to vote one or the other candidate. I still need more information. In particular, I think I want some more information about Anthony's experience working with people. That's an area I really want to find out more about. Working with staff, doing some of the stuff that he's been doing. So that's my feedback. I could go with moving both of these forward, expanding the process, having another interview with each of them for us, but also bringing them back into the community to talk again with the community. I think, as I mentioned in my earlier email, if we just bring forward one candidate, that's kind of putting all your eggs in one basket. And I don't know what our criteria would be for either accepting or turning down a single candidate. So
I also would like to, respect the process that occurred with an 18-member plus search committee that reviewed 25 resumes and interviewed, went through, deliberated, and these were the ones they put forward. And by just having, an hour review, plus, we did get some supplemental information from Carolyn, letters of recommendation, some other information about the candidates, plus this interview. I just don't feel ready to make any kind of decision at this point. And it's, we have to, but I would like to think that next week is vacation, but I'd like to think we can move these final processes forward in the week after vacation and the first week in March, so that we can make a decision as quickly as possible about one way or the other, or if we have to go back out. I'm just also very, very concerned about the numbers of school districts in the state who are looking for superintendents right now. I mean, I was with the, at Mass Municipal Association in Boston today. There had to be at least 8 communities that I was talking to who are looking for superintendents right now.
Can I ask 2 follow-up questions of people? Number one is going through the process, but to double up on Sean's question about the process, were these 2 candidates the best of the 25, or were these 2 candidates 2 you were legitimately excited about?
I asked that question a week ago.
Because that's a big deal. Like, I understand.
See how to answer that in a way that doesn't get me into trouble.
I mean, not on a schedule.
We got 25 applicants.
So I'm asking for a subjective answer. I wasn't there. So
Identifying
as a voting body, what
the criteria that the community wanted was somebody with superintendent experience. We didn't get a lot of candidates with superintendent experience. In fact, I think we might have had 3 or 4, and a couple of those were eliminated simply as part of our basic research. These 2 guys scored well for different reasons with different people in the group. So they were not, neither of these candidates were unanimous, but they were candidates that the group felt we could bring forward to the next step in the process, and felt that these were candidates that would offer something to the school district and that the school committee should see.
Okay.
Were they the best people? We had some people drop out. I think a strong candidate dropped out.
Okay, thank you.
So I think we have our decision then. We're going to move the process forward, and so Bruce, I guess that means that you get back in touch with NESDAQ and let them know that we would like to, and work with Kathy around scheduling.
We had set aside the 27th for the next step.
And then also, but we need to do district visits. And we need to get those scheduled and figure out what those are for one of the candidates.
Yeah, but that's on him. That's what I got done. What did you do? So that's on him. He has to come up with some kind of structure.
Right, so Bruce, I don't know, you probably couldn't hear Kathy, but if you could reach back to Anthony and tell us where do we go? I mean, it's obvious we have Beverly and Wilmington.
Yeah, I
Sean,
will.
so what do we do in terms of doing some follow-up?
We probably could do some Wellesley with, for Anthony. And phone visitations to Cincinnati.
Okay.
And
But could we
naturally,
talk to him about
his work
how we would
experience in
get-
the past 5 years, I don't see.
I will start tomorrow morning by talking to NASDAQ, and then I will, one way or the other, I will be back in touch with Kathy before the week is out.
Okay.
And we'll get some feedback from NASDAQ about how we deal with the unique circumstances that Anthony has.
Okay.
But I would,
Gotta be able to make some connections.
my feeling is that we probably just seen what he's been doing in the past 5 years. Wellesley is, whether we actually go out and visit or just do phone calls to people that have worked with him there, is key. And then we do the same thing with Cincinnati. He spent 2 years working as a consultant with the Cincinnati Public Schools, and that was where he felt he put most of his professional time into. Was
And I think we had a couple references from there,
Yeah,
so that we could reach back out to those people and have conversations.
Some are locally available too, if I'm not mistaken.
Yep.
References.
Okay. Does that sound like a plan? Everybody all right with that?
Yep.
Okay.
So I'll pick this up tomorrow, and I'll talk to Carolyn Burke and get a sense of moving forward from her. I'll also find out what's in that folder. I think that folder will be some information on these two candidates that came out from the rest of the committee. So check it out. It's right. Kathy, do you have that folder?
No, I don't know what
Did
it
you
is.
leave it with the central office?
No, I have nothing. She brought, did she bring it tonight? Did she
She
bring it?
left it on the table, the night of school committee.
So who took it?
It was near you, but no, it was on the edge. Somebody had to pick it up. Maybe Mrs. Kennedy did.
Probably.
Can you check with her?
We'll check our
please?
minutes
Yes,
next
we
week.
check with her.
Okay. So, is there anything else we need to discuss at this point?
I'll be back in touch with everybody tomorrow.
Bruce, thank you so much. Appreciate you taking the time to Skype in on your vacation.
Thank you.
And I understand we are supposed to wish you a belated happy birthday.
Thank you.
Happy Valentine's Day tomorrow.
Silent.
And without further ado, I'll take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Do a roll.
Right?
We gotta
Oh, we
do
do
a roll call,
Okay.
sorry. Mr. Harkaiser,
Yes.
Mr. Duquesne,
Yes.
Mr. Callahan,
Yes.
Mr. Reardon,
Yes.
Mr. Cole,
Aye.
Mayor Holiday,
Yes,
Mr. Manning.
Yes.
we are adjourned. Thank you, everyone.